Hello, and thanks for joining us for the Pharmacy Cannabis Lecture Series. Each session is designed to deliver a small and in-depth dose of cannabis education. I'm Candace Hawes, and I want to thank all of our viewers and all of our customers from the Pottery, from the Pharmacy Santa Ana, Santa Barbara, and Berkeley for joining us today. In this session, we're going to discuss inflammatory conditions in cannabis. Our guest speaker is Sara Rotman, who is diagnosed with Crohn's and is also the founder of Well Founded. Sara Rotman has been featured in Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, The Business of Fashion, was in Vogue, and she was also a regular contributor to the Entrepreneurs online magazine, just to name a few. Her experience spans more than 25 years working in fashion, beauty, and the entertainment industry. With numerous awards, successful brand launches, and repositions to her credit, she has a thorough understanding of the unique sensitivities and requirements involved in creating and maintaining a brand's integrity and how to best position it for longevity and growth. Now in her 6th year in the cannabis industry, she's become an industry leader and pioneer. Together with her husband, they own and operate one of the state's largest legal outdoor cannabis farms called Busy Bee Organics, a farm that's been described as the gold standard by the CFDA compliance officers, local politicians, and fellow farmers alike. She's brought her entrepreneurial leadership and skills to the industry beyond just farming and has become a local, state advocate for cannabis, for the cannabis industry. She serves on the Lompoc Valley Cannabis Association board and is a founding member of the campaign Good Farmers, Good Neighbors, focused on cannabis advocacy and education for the industry. The launch of her brand Well Founded is born out of the most personal work that she and her husband have been developing on the farm that they called home. I'm excited to have Sara with us to share her amazing story and to talk about using cannabis to treat chronic inflammatory conditions such as Crohn's. Thank you, Sara, so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. This is my first big old webinar. So thank you everybody for joining. I feel honored to have so many people showing up to listen to what we have to say.
Yeah, definitely. We're honored to have you as well. And you have an amazing background and credentials. So can you tell me how you went from working in the industry, from the fashion, beauty, and entertainment industry to coming into the cannabis industry? Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Sure. I could give you the very short version and then I'll elaborate. But the short version is I got life-threateningly ill, so like so many people, unfortunately, who come into the cannabis space, I started out with really no knowledge whatsoever about it. I was not an anti-cannabis person, but I wasn't a social user. I tried it a few times. I found THC challenging. I'm kind of a New Yorkie control freak. And so I was a little bit uncomfortable. And I was more of a caffeinated kind of up New Yorker. I just never, and my perception, as completely mistaken and ill-informed as it was that cannabis was for people who are less interested in moving quickly through life. And I didn't understand any of the therapeutic benefits whatsoever. I knew people used it for cancer patients. I didn't even know why. And so it just wasn't on my radar. But in 2014, when we purchased our farm, within 3 weeks of moving in, I was in the hospital in full-blown renal failure from complications from severe Crohn's disease that had gone undiagnosed or misdiagnosed for about 15 years. So by the time I ended up in the hospital, apparently I hadn't really digested food in 2 or 3 years. And as a result, I was in renal failure. So my system was completely shutting down. I had stopped having the capacity to process the toxins that were, I was ingesting or getting into my body. And there's a much longer version of the story that involves an incredibly self-centered celebrity. But long story short, I was at a meeting with said celebrity, and I was in Los Angeles. And I noticed this is a very shoe-free zone that her place of business, which was also her home, and I had taken this meeting and we were talking about logo design and the things I used to do in my business. And I started losing consciousness. I knew that I was actually sort of dying immediately. And I sort of politely excused myself because I couldn't really understand what she was saying. And I grabbed my very fancy, like Sergio Rossi 5-inch heels, and I couldn't get them on my feet. My feet had swollen up. My legs had swollen from my hip all the way to the ground like an elephant's leg. And I had these weird marble-like lumps that had popped up on the bottom of my feet. And I remembered when my dog, who had recently died, and she died of renal failure from cancer, and she looked the same. And it was the night before she passed. her legs swelled up the same way. And the vet told me at the time that was because renal failure allows you to stop processing toxins. And that was what was happening to me. So I called my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and I said, hey, I think I'm dying right now. And I'm just going to tootle off to Cedars-Sinai and see if they can fix this so I can, go play polo on Monday. And they immediately admitted me and said that, oh my God, you're in renal failure and that's bad. And I was like, well, how bad is it? They're like, well, you die from that. I was like, well, how quickly? They're like, possibly very, very fast, maybe tonight. And then with that, they plunged a whole lot of morphine into my arm. And I spent the next 8 or 9 days, I don't even know, more than a week in the hospital in intensive care while they tried to figure out what was wrong with me. And what was wrong with me, after quite a lot of testing, was severe Crohn's disease. And I had also colitis, and colitis is a generic term. It's sort of like saying headache. I had 8 22-inch ulcers in my lower intestines, and that was part of the reason I wasn't processing food. And by the time I was in the hospital, I had stopped being able to consume even water through my mouth. I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't drink water. So I was on an IV, getting all my nutrients and hydration from an IV. And that sort of continued for a long time. And so, I was, my God, probably 30 pounds thinner than I am now. And it wasn't as fabulous as I wanted it to be. And they released me from the hospital. And this is sort of what started my long odyssey. I won't go into all of the details, although if anyone has specific questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them. But, I'm the daughter of an academic and a teaching physician at that. And so I had a lot of faith and experience and understanding about, really good medicine. And I had a lot of trust in it. And, that was trust that it turned out, I don't know if it was misplaced, but it certainly didn't bear any fruitful results for me. So I went and found the best doctor that they had at Cedars-Sinai, which is one of the best hospitals in the world. And I found a very good doctor, and I consulted with him and several other very good doctors. And I determined what my very best treatment process would be. And, what I learned was Crohn's disease, like so many chronic inflammatory conditions, and certainly in the spectrum of Crohn's, Crohn's is on the same spectrum as lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and Crohn's disease. They're all cousins, nasty little cousins. And so any one of those diseases, traditional symptoms can show up in any of these diseases. So in my disease, I had a lot of inflammatory, like rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. I would get terrible feelings in my hands and joints, and I couldn't really move. And I started having neurological deficit like you can with lupus. And what the doctors gave me was 80 milligrams of prednisone for a year. And then they wanted to put me on a thing called Remicade, which is a biological weapon, if you will. And it was designed for AIDS patients. So not people HIV positive, but AIDS patients. And the thinking was, your immune system is malfunctioning. It's attacking itself. And so we'll just turn off your immune system, which is something it turns out you need. But in my case, my immune system misunderstood the signals it was getting from my otherwise healthy body. And that's why I had 8 22-inch ulcers in my lower intestine. And so this Remicade comes with a lot of side effects and a great cost, and is only 50% likely to work. So it costs $15,000 a month. I was meant to be on it for the rest of my life. And that was my copay. That wasn't, and I had great insurance. It could put you in liver failure. It caused in me crippling depression, brittle skin, loss of hair. And like I said, it was only 50% likely to work. The prednisone works really well, but for sure you'll die from it. So you really should never be on it for a year. And I was on it for a year, and then almost 2 years as I stepped down to be able to safely come off it. And so anyway, long story short, the Remicade did turn off my immune system quite successfully. And I am the only case of tetanus that Cottage Hospital here in Santa Barbara has ever seen. And they didn't believe me, but even though I've been inoculated against tetanus because they fucked with my immune system so hard, pardon my language, I was susceptible. And so I ended up waking up one morning with lockjaw. And that was really scary because tetanus, which I found out, who knew? Everybody knows about lockjaw, kind of step on a rusty nail, you get lockjaw. Well, the thing is, it's a toxin that goes into your body that causes paralysis. And so if the first paralysis you get is in your jaw, the next is in your hands. But the last and scariest one is your diaphragm. And your diaphragm becomes paralyzed and you can't breathe and you suffocate in your own body wide awake. And so when I finally got to the hospital, I told them what was wrong. They didn't believe me. They called the CDC. They called the NIH. They were like, it's not possible. I was like, it's possible. Trust me, blah, blah, blah. I'm on Remicade. 19 hours later, they're like, oh my God, you have tetanus. They gave me the antitoxin. And then they explained to me the thing about my diaphragm. And they're like, we don't know if we've stopped the progression of the paralysis. So we need you to stay here overnight so we can see what happens in case we need to put you on a machine to breathe for you. And I was like, oh, and still didn't know what the hell that meant. I was like, well, how long does it take the toxin to clear? Because they're like, just until the toxin clears. I was like, oh, what's that, like 45 minutes, an hour? They're like 6 to 9 months.
Whoa.
And I had the first panic attack of my life. And I mean, full blown. I was like, I can't be on a breathing apparatus wide awake for 6 to 9 months. And thankfully, my breathing wasn't so compromised that I needed to go on that. I did have some stiffness in my hands. I did have lockjaw for between 6 and 9 months. I couldn't open my mouth. And, when I went to see my rheumatologist, this is when I was still in the Remicade, and sort of shared with him this experience and how concerned I was about being on a medicine for the rest of my life that could leave me open to such disaster. He said, well, the thing is, Sarah, we've just done your blood work and you're also going into liver failure. So I have to take you off this medicine anyway. And I said, well, I have to remember Crohn's disease isn't just, you don't just get diarrhea from it. You're in debilitating pain. I was losing my hair. I couldn't work. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat, and I couldn't work. I couldn't walk. And he said, I couldn't take this medicine anymore. And I asked him, well, what do you have to help me? And he said, Sarah, we have nothing to help you. I have nothing to help you. Crohn's disease is a chronic, incurable, painful, hideous disease that will drastically diminish the quality of your life. And I have nothing else to help you. And with that, he literally sent me out to the street. And Kim on my team has heard the story 100 times, but I remember it was a Tuesday. It was around 3 p.m, a beautiful day in Beverly Hills. And I walked out of this man's office. And I sat on the pavement in the middle of the street like a 3-year-old and cried like a baby. And I wanted to kill myself for the first time in my life. I was in so much pain, and I saw no possible good reason to continue living like that if that was all that they had. And I called my husband and I just said, look, I want to die. I can't do this. I can't be in this kind of pain. There's nothing to help me. They literally handed me a bucket of morphine, and I can't get away from this pain, and I can't even eat or drink water. I mean, you just can't live like that. The idea that you're hungry, but every time you put food in your mouth, you're doubled over in pain like someone shot you is just mean. And so he said, look, you have to try cannabis. And I always say, at that time, I'd have sucked the fart out of a dead chicken. I'd have taken absolutely anything if it would have helped. I'd eat white dog poop off the fucking pavement if that's what it took. But I was afraid of THC, because I don't do well with psychotropic effect. And in this case, I had already lost so much control over my life. I think my anxiety was even more heightened. And I didn't even do well with the morphine. I didn't like the way that could make me feel psychologically. It was very challenging for me. And at the time, my husband had been doing a lot of research, and he's like, look, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous because this was 7 years ago, but at the time, CBD, nobody was really talking about it. And he said, look, there's they've been doing some genetic work with cannabis, and there's strains that you can take that are high CBD, low THC, that are going to be really good for inflammation and really less challenging for you. And so the other thing I was worried about, I was like, oh, I don't smoke. I'm already sick as hell. Why on earth would I take up smoking? And I didn't even know that there was ways to gain access to cannabis's healthful benefits without smoking it. So he said, no, we can try concentrates, we can try edibles. There's things that we can do. And so we got our little cards and went to this clown shoe wearing doctor in Venice Beach. And he gave my husband a script too, even though there's nothing wrong with him. And but Nate was very kind enough to be the guinea pig. And we went to the nearest dispensary we could find and picked up something akin to Rick Simpson oil, which is a brown earwax like paste in a syringe that was sort of had somebody's, Sharpie pen written on it. That was the maximum, degree of testing. And lo and behold, it worked. I mean, the first time I took some of that stuff, it very quickly took my pain away, and it very quickly helped reduce my inflammation. And over time, it continued to get better and better. And that was a miracle for me. But the challenge was, this was Prop 215 days, I would have something that worked miraculously well, And then I would buy the same product and it didn't work at all. I got arsenic poisoning from concentrates once because, you know, back then there was no testing. It was just the farmer's word. It was whatever the hell, you know, it was basically in a mason jar, and, you know, there was just no controls. I'm probably one of the few cannabis people that's actually really grateful for testing and dosing, and accuracy in dosing and repeatability of experience is vitally important to us in our business. And I think from a patient advocacy perspective is really important. You know, I remember one time I was still trying to work, and I always tell the story. I was going back to New York City to do a meeting. I had a meeting with Michael Kors. We were doing a perfume campaign for him, and I had taken a whole vial of what was supposed to be, you know, like Rick Simpson oil, but CBD, not high THC. And I got my coffee in the morning, and I'm wearing my red Givenchy dress, and I've got my fantastic shoes on. I'm like ready to go to the top floor of the GM building on 59th and 5th. And I'm, you know, suddenly realizing that coffee is like the best coffee I mean, ever. And it wasn't that great coffee. It was like shitty, you know, mud water deli coffee. It wasn't even like a good espresso or anything, but it was miraculous. And by the time I get into the elevator, it's like, I'm like, oh, maybe that's not supposed to be. And by the time I'm like on the 30th floor, I'm kind of starting to do the weird crab walk on the walls, you know, like you're too high. By the time I got to the top floor where my meeting was, I had to get a total stranger to help me back down the elevator and put me in a cab because I was so high I couldn't even read my driver's license to tell them where the fuck I lived. And I was high like that for 3 days.
Wow.
And I called my husband and I was like panicked. And that was sort of it. You know, I had arsenic poisoning. I had the wrong stuff. I had stuff that didn't work. I had stuff that worked. And at this time we had purchased our farm and we'd started growing all of our own food. And we were setting about creating the whole farm, you know, for organic practices. And I was very, very interested in sustainable practices. And, you know, for me, one of the big priorities was, you know, if we could control what I put in my body, we could control to some degree, you know, the severity of my illness or symptoms. And so we started, you know, we had our own cows and pigs and chickens and vegetables, and we were sort of doing everything ourselves so we could trust what went into it, that there was no errant pesticides, that there was no, you know, antibiotics. Antibiotics were a huge physical trigger for me. So we had started doing all of that. And at the time, after I was like, I had to miss my biggest meeting, and this, you know, I ended up having to close my company. I just couldn't work. He said, you know, well, you know, we're growing all of our own food and we have this farm. Why don't we, you know, just grow our own medicine? Like, you know, how hard could it be? So,
how hard could
it be? Thank God we just have no fucking clue, because it's really, 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 really hard.
But worth it.
But well worth it. No. And so that was sort of our odyssey began. And that was 2015. We founded a collective and set about, you know, developing healthy soil and healthy biodiversity and healthy ecosystem on our farm so that we could create cannabis and hopefully help other people like me, you know, feel relief, because it really is the only thing that's caused me relief. And I've been in, you know, more or less remission. I tend to have small flares about 3 or 4 times a year, but nothing like, you know, that would put me in the hospital or cause me to have open ulcers or have to have a resection and remove my intestines. So I'm very fortunate, and I'm very emotional about it, because I mean, I was going to die, and if not die, I was going to have my insides cut out, and I didn't want to live like that. So it's been a miracle. And so we become huge advocates. And I think we approach our brand a little bit differently. You know, we never did it as an arbitrage, and we never did it to make money. We did it to make safe, beautiful medicine and also recreational things for people to enjoy this magical plant that saved my life.
Wow. So many compelling things that you said in your story is just amazing, man. I've heard so many people that come into the dispensary as well, you know, dealing with, you know, chronic conditions and just the side effects of other medicines, you know, and how being in pain on a daily basis, like, can take away, you know, your willingness to even want to, you know, live. It's just, I'm so glad that you found cannabis, you know, that you've dedicated yourself to the plant now, and now you're helping other people, you know, find their wellness. And I completely agree with you as well. You know, prior to Prop 64 and to the Bureau and the state testing, it was hard to find a consistent supply of a cannabis product that was going to give you the same dose every time. And there's many people that ended up in similar situations. So that is one of the best things that came out of the regulations, as burdensome as they are, is that we now have safe, reliable, accurate medication that people can take, and they know what they're going to get out of it, and they can plan their day accordingly. There's no more surprises.
100%. And the other thing I really like is that they can come back and have that experience again once they find something that works for them. That was so frustrating before. You'd have this sort of, moment of relief, and then it's like you spend the rest of the year chasing that feeling again because you couldn't find it. It didn't necessarily reliably exist.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to go back just a little bit. So what is the difference between Crohn's disease? What is Crohn's disease, and how is it different from other GI conditions?
So most importantly, and like most diseases, Crohn's disease is an autoimmune dysfunction. And it's a disease of inflammation. So cancer is a disease of inflammation, and everything's a disease of inflammation. But
yeah,
yeah, and so across the board. So note to self: take all the CBD you can possibly get in your body at all times, forever, because it's really going to help you. But Crohn's disease specifically is a disease that expresses that immune or autoimmune dysfunction by attacking it. Predominantly attacks your body anywhere between, along your digestive tract. So that could mean anywhere from your mouth, to your anus and everything in between. And so it can, basically your body recognizes good things as bad and starts to attack them, and it'll attack itself, which is why I ended up with ulcers in my intestines where they shouldn't exist, because my body thought harmless bacteria in my body was a foreign invader and needed to be attacked. So healthy cells turn on healthy cells and create problems. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is, Crohn's disease is a sister disease, or a cousin, if you will, to rheumatoid arthritis and also to lupus. And so there is crossover in the symptoms and the reaction that your body has. And oftentimes people may have more than one. Crohn's disease is not known to have a genetic marker, but the thinking is generally that you have a genetic predisposition and likely an environmental trigger. So for me, I had picked up a parasite in Argentina when I was running around the Pampa doing fun things on horseback. And it was misdiagnosed, of course, in the United States, because we don't have this kind of bacteria here, and no one believed me. In any event, when they finally figured out what it was, they had to give me such a strong load of antiparasitic and antibiotics that I think that was the trigger for my Crohn's disease. Nobody knows for sure, but that's just my personal historical guess. And most people with Crohn's disease will have a dual diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. Now, ulcerative colitis can come from a great many things. For me, that was just the symptomatic expression of the Crohn's disease. But people can get that from many other things. And some of the other bowel diseases, in that those can be more like diverticulitis is more of a mechanical issue. The Crohn's disease is a chronic disease. And again, inflammatory bowel disease is just, could be anything. I mean, it literally could, you could have eaten a parasite, you could have any problem. That just means, your insides are in pain, but it doesn't mean that there's a specific cause. But Crohn's disease, yes, is a autoimmune dysfunction in your body going haywire in a very ugly direction.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I have a couple friends that suffer from Crohn's disease, and I can definitely say that it is debilitating, and you do have to use cannabis on a daily basis to help keep those symptoms at bay. And you said earlier, and I totally agree, that it's a good idea for everybody to take CBD on a daily basis. Every day we're fighting a battle against inflammation, and we don't even know it. Inflammation in the brain is like Alzheimer's and dementia. Within the lungs, that's asthma, and the GI system, you talked about that already. So if we can keep inflammation at bay, then we can help prevent these conditions from getting to the point where they're debilitating, and also keep the symptoms that we do have from being persistent and interfering with what we have to do on a daily basis. So the reason why CBD and THC works within our system is because we have an endocannabinoid system, and this is a natural body system that we have, and we produce our endocannabinoids, and cannabis actually has phytocannabinoids that play into that system. Can you give our guests, maybe some of them that are new to cannabis and joining us for the first time, a little bit of your perspective on the endocannabinoid system?
I mean, for me, this is kind of magical. And I think one of the things, that I look forward to federal legalization so that we can have a lot more formal study done and turn all of our, much greater minds than mine to really getting to the bottom of it. But, if the endocannabinoid system is the thing that maintains like psychological, emotional, and cognitive stability, I mean, those are like, that is everything, right?
Yeah.
And cannabis like actually possesses cannabinoids that directly link in and influence our endocannabinoid system. There's not a great many natural the ones. There are more than 100, again, as of yet to be studied thoroughly. Certainly I look forward to learning more about it, but generally speaking, often about 2 THC and CBD. And again, very generally speaking, CBD is sort of Tory and THC is kind of, they do a lot more than that, but it's interesting. CBD can actually kind of reduce some of the feelings that can produce if you're having a little bit too much psychotropic effect. So it can kind of add a little bit of balance. And so, and how important it is to have full spectrum cannabis in all of your therapies. So, some people are really doing a lot of work on isolating the different cannabis. For me, and I think lower quality version of any different therapy. And I think while we're learning what's possible, I think getting the most out of that plant and what's taken millions of years to sort of naturally evolve as one of the original plant DNAs on the planet. That we can actually continue to trace back the oldest and recognize. I believe it's olive trees and cannabis are sort of some of the oldest cultivars our planet has. So they must have been doing something right for a long time. And I think most importantly, to get access to sort of all those cannabinoids is really important. But again, if you want to try to influence or customize a program for yourself, learning a little bit about what percentages or volumes of THC and CBD are tolerable for you is really, really important and something to look at. But again, generally speaking, high CBD, no psychotropic effect, lots of inflammatory. High THC, lots of pain killing, potentially higher psychotropic effect, but also super beneficial. I think one thing I also wanted to say, just what you had mentioned earlier, is a lot of taking cannabis prophylactically and sort of as an everyday treatment is really important. But I've also found that even when you're talking about wellness and not necessarily doing it from a medicinal way, but even just an anti-stressor or the way that we drink a bottle of wine or a glass of wine or a martini with friends, and that sort of to decompress. One thing I found, especially as somebody with an inflammatory disease, and I love a glass of wine at the end of the day, like everybody else, or a drink, but I find that, that is definitely an inflammatory and irritant for my bowels and my whole digestive system. And cannabis is the opposite. You don't have a hangover. You get the same sort of relaxation and an overwhelming sense of well-being. You don't have that crippling depression that happens after drinking. And so I think even socially and recreationally, it's this huge gift to all of us that we can say, like, I can unwind. We use our tinctures like in a glass of herbal tea or club soda or the lemonade, like we came when we did it with you guys when we had an event there. And I think it's a nice way to, you get your medicine without feeling like you have to take it. It can be this other social thing that I think is really great.
Yeah, it can be enjoyable. I love taking CBD every day. I think that it just helps, balance my endocannabinoid system, keep those symptoms at bay. But knowing about the 2 different cannabinoids is very important. So I'm glad that you pointed that out for people that may be new users. When you're dealing with one of your flare-ups, what is your personal routine that you use? Do you use a certain amount of CBD, or do you like to use topical and combine with sublingual, or do you only use sublinguals? What is your routine?
Sure. Thank you for asking. So for me, my go-to all day, every day is sublinguals. So I really like to use tinctures because I feel like it's the most customizable and it's the most adjusting on the fly.
Sorry, just one second.
See, and I take that like, sure.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry, you popped off and popped back on. I was just telling everybody to hold on for a second.
Okay,
Please continue.
Sorry about that. Sure. So I take our 20-to-1 CBD to THC ratio, and I take that like 5 times a day for sure. If I'm healthy and I'm maintaining my disease well, I take like a full dropper in the morning and a full dropper at night. If I'm starting to have a mild little flare, I'll take that 5 to 10 times a day, and it really helps. If I'm having a more severe flare, I'm going to add in my 1-to-1, and I might take like a quarter to a half dropper 3 or 4 times a day. I tend to do a lot of microdosing because, again, the THC is a little tough for me. And then at night, especially if I'm having trouble sleeping because I'm in a lot of pain, I will take either a full dropper of the 1-to-1 or maybe a half dropper of the 1-to-5. Our 1-to-5 formula has approximately 33 milligrams of THC in a single full pull dropper. So I tend to go a little easy. Like if I took a whole dropper, I'd be a little uncomfortably stoned. But for me, the 1-to-1 has a really nice balance. And even in that 1-to-1, our dropper has almost 20 milligrams of THC. So if I take a half dropper, I'm at 10. That's great for me to sleep. That's going to do a lot for my pain. And it's also going to do a lot for my sort of general sense of well-being. So, but I get as much into my body as I can if I'm feeling a flare. And the other thing that's really important that I think people don't talk about sort of enough is the one thing that I've learned, that if I'm going to have a flare, the best way to prevent a flare is not only to get as much of this anti-inflammatory and pain-killing medicine into my body, but to force myself to sleep. Your body heals when you're sleeping. When you're in REM sleep, that is when your body's doing its repair. When you have a chronic disease like I do, that repair is vital to not having it spiral out of control. And so if I can take my 1-to-5 and get, even if I force myself to go to bed for 36 hours and I can do that with that medicine and just sleep it off, I find I can reduce a flare that would normally take 3 or 4 to 8 weeks to resolve. I can almost get it down to like 1 or 2 days.
That's amazing. And that's funny that you point that out, because I actually have done this similar thing in the past. If I had some sort of issue that was, causing me to not feel good, I would take a gummy and just sleep it off. Like I know if I take this gummy or a couple gummies, I'm going to get a good 8 to 10 hours. I'm going to go to sleep pretty quickly, and then I'll wake up and I'll feel so much better. So that I like that you pointed out that that's like another use.
Yeah, it's really important, like any illness, but in particular, like chronic inflammatory illnesses, it basically, in my experience, it sort of arrests the spiraling of the problem,
That's cool. And I mean, it probably took you a while to figure this out. I know that's one of the main problems that people have when they're first coming on board with cannabis, is trying to find that dosage that works for them. So I would suggest that people keep a cannabis journal, write down like what you took, how it made you feel, how long it lasted, until you really dial it in. And then you'll become eventually like an expert like yourself, and you'll just know what kind of formula you need at any particular time, depending on how you're feeling.
Totally. Absolutely. I agree with that. And really, learn the brands that work for you, and take notes for sure, because it makes a big difference. And then you can gain that confidence in terms of how am I going to handle this later?
Yeah, exactly. So I really, really love your guys' products and everything that you guys put into the medicine that you're making available to other people. So I want to kind of talk about the farm a little bit. So you talked about how you guys, you had already moved into this farm, and that you wanted to, grow your own food to help your own health and wellness, and that this kind of inspired you. And so you started growing a small crop. And then what made you decide to go, full scale and get a state license and help other people?
Well, when we started, we were always helping other people. So, I'm a super Pollyanna. And so when we decided we were going to try to grow our own cannabis, we immediately founded a collective. So we never ever weren't trying to help people. We were always trying to help myself, plus anybody else that we thought we could help along the way. And we had a couple of great friends. I have a friend, she's witchy, she went to herbalism school, and we started making our own tinctures and figuring out, because that was interesting to me. And so we kind of always wanted to have the whole farm be a cannabis crop. And we worked hard to heal the soil for the whole farm, because it was not so well taken care of before we purchased it. It had been farmed kind of traditional farming or conventional agriculture. And so when we first planted our cover crop to try to heal the soil and put out our chickens, which were also meant to replace the nutrients in the soil, we couldn't grow a single blade of grass. There was so much herbicide in the soil. So we had to wait 3 long years before it was even safe to grow cannabis on much of the farm, just to heal the soil, create some biodiversity, and get some probiotic health into the soil. And again, through a lot of different avenues. So we, planted a bunch of cover crops. We got 2,000 chickens, and we got a herd of goats, and we, did a lot of rotational farming with those critters. And then we started with a cleaner crop. So we put in some squash, and onions and things. And then finally, after 3 years of really working hard to heal the soil, we were able to put cannabis, and, and also simultaneously working on our state licensing and local, land use permit stuff. And who'd have thought that all would have taken 7 years, but it certainly did. And, but so we were sort of doing those things simultaneously throughout the time. And that was always the vision, was to use the farm as a big old place of healing. We find our farm to be a very nurturing place. And so we wanted to be able to share that with more folks than just us.
Yeah, it sounds magical. Sounds like a dream. I love, living a high-paced life in New York City, working with all these celebrities and, all these important people. And then now, you've found like your peace and like where you're really, I think, supposed to be. I think that that's all kind of led you to here. And I feel like this is like your calling. This is just really amazing what you guys have put together. And I'm just so in love with what you guys are doing. So your farm is also clean green certified. Can you tell us about that, what that means and how you accomplish that?
Yeah, that's a no small thing, but generally speaking, clean green certification is an equivalency for certified organic. So certified organic is a national designation and a federal designation, and clearly we are not able to participate in any federal programs. And certified organic is something similar. The Clean Green Certification Program was actually founded by a gentleman who was a shellfish fisherman up in Northern California, and he was kind of pushed out of his livelihood by sort of local overregulation. And he's a very interesting story, somebody you might want to consider talking to. And he's now a compliance lawyer. And he set out, because he was so frustrated with sort of overreach and overregulation, making it impossible for him to put forth a healthy product, even though it was environmentally friendly and healthy, that he'd gotten into sort of the cannabis and had been doing some work with other cannabis farmers, and he's helpful for us to have a certification program that mirrors that, but that was usable, in the cannabis world. And so he basically created this program, and it has a lot of the hallmarks of a certified organic, but again, isn't something that we can participate in. So, we do talk about, the biodiversity. We talk about what nutrients we're allowed to use and what systems by which, we're farming, what things we're not allowed to use, which, is everything, even just for CAD 3 testing. But I think being really committed stewards of the land and to sustainable practices is a large part of it. Being consistent with our labeling practices, the treatment of our soil. I wish we could rotate our crops more than we could. The licensing is too expensive. But one thing that we do at our farm, we commit to a cover crop. So instead of a third turn, which we could certainly fit in, would probably make us more money, but we do a cover crop so that we can get some biodiversity back into the soil, and to also put some natural nitrogen into the soil through legumes and other things, rather than having to continue to put aftermarket, chemicals there, which we don't do. And we, of course, all of our practices are organic. Cannabis farmers do not have to be organic.
Those are beautiful pictures of the farm. Just one moment and she'll be back with us. We have some technical issues. Gotta love the internet. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes we have a couple little issues. She'll be back with us in just a second. But in the meantime, you could definitely look at all these beautiful pictures of the farm. There we go. Sorry about that.
Like, I can see you. All right, perfect. Sorry about that, guys.
That's okay. Internet, it happens to all of us. But yeah. So was there any last thoughts that you had on the clean green certification?
Well, not sure where you guys lost me, but basically it's something that we've been really committed to. I think the only thing that maybe got lost when I went away was that, cannabis farmers aren't required to be organic, but it was really, really important that we always maintain a sustainable and organic farming practices. And so that makes our job more expensive and more difficult, but I think it puts a safer, better product on the market. So that's really important to us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I appreciate that you do that because like you said, there are state regulations that say that, products can't have pesticides and stuff like that, but you don't have to go that extra step. So I really appreciate that you take that love and care with your product because I think the consumers appreciate that as well. I think so the products
I think it makes a better product too.
Yeah, I completely agree. So your products are full spectrum and you use natural terpenes. Can you talk about why you think it's important from people that are using it medically to have products that are full spectrum and have natural terpenes?
Sure. Well, the terpenes themselves have quite a lot of biological benefits. So I think, throwing them away as they do when they make distillate sometimes is a bummer. Separating it, I don't think is a problem, but reintroducing them, I think, is important. And I also think one of the things that we do that's very different that I think really protects the quality of the flower is we create all of our concentrates from fresh whole flower. So it's the entire flower and it's frozen rather than dried. And for me, that's a huge point of difference because, when they're drying biomass to put into concentrates, they're not treating it with the same care and love that you do when you have cured flower. It gets dried too quickly. You lose a tremendous amount of the vital and important cannabinoids that we're looking for. We lose a lot of the trichomes, we lose a lot of the quality that I think, again, we're still unlocking the mysteries of why it's so good. But I get this all the time. Like, people took your tincture and it's so much better and different than everybody else's. I don't understand why that is. And I'm really starting to believe that it's because we create all of our concentrates from this fresh frozen material. And I tried to describe it to a friend of mine the other day. I said, well, if you take a beautiful, prime rib out of the freezer and cook it, it's going to be this beautiful thing. Or you could even have tartare if you want it. A very different thing than like beef, which is still beef, technically, but you've lost a lot of the nuance and quality, or a dried rose versus a fresh cut rose, and the difference in the complexity and the softness and all of those things. So I know that those are very esoteric and not terribly scientifically defensible positions to take, but that's been my experience, is that the frozen more of those 113 cannabinoids and provides more access to a better quality product with less degradation before it goes into our products.
Yeah. And I've always told patients that as well. If they tried one sublingual product and if they didn't really get the result that they were looking for, to try a different brand, because sometimes a different brand will have a different effect. And especially considering like what you pointed out, that some companies are using like the trim, or the smalls or something like that to make their topicals and their tinctures and stuff. But you guys are using the whole plant flower. So you're using the best quality material. And that's why likely people get so much of a better effect from your guys' product.
Yeah, that's what we believe. And I think, 100%. The other thing is like dried flower, again, not carefully cured, but brutally dried. I mean, you can lose from 15 to 85% of its potency and effect just in the drying process and the oxidization process. So how could that possibly yield the same quality as something that didn't have to endure that brutality?
Yeah. So you guys carefully craft your products. I love this. I love learning all these secrets about your guys' formulas. So your formulas are also ratio based. Can you talk about why you think that this is beneficial for patients?
Sure. It's a little bit like what we were talking about before in terms of my routine. I wanted to be sure that our patients and customers and recreational users had access to a variety of different treatment options or programs that they could customize for themselves. So again, generally speaking, we have our really high CBD formula, which is our 20-to-1. We have our high THC formula, which is our 1-to-5. And then we have our balanced formula, which is equal parts CBD to THC. And so this really should provide like any and all customers with different vehicles for treating different concerns that they have or being recreationally different. I have one friend who's also another farmer, and he's a small livestock farmer. He works really hard and he has a super high tolerance for THC. He loves the 1 to 5. He'll take like 3 full droppers. I'm like, my God, man, that's 100 milligrams. He's like, yeah, no problem. I take the 20 to 1 like all day, every day. And it just gives me a sense of well-being. It's sort of like, I like to liken it to like WD-40 on the gears of my engine, kind of keeps it all loose and going. And then the 1 to 1, I think, is a great balance, great sleep aid. And that's where all our topicals are in the 1 to 1, because we think the CBD and THC are equally important, especially when you get into a topical.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like having the different formulas as well, so that, you can approach people on the different levels that they feel comfortable with. And also you could, buy the whole line and then just use one depending on like what you're feeling each particular day. Totally. I want to add in one question from one of our viewers. Somebody's saying that they haven't had any relief from CBD. Right now she's taking a particular CBD product. So if somebody's not getting any benefit from a product, what would you suggest?
Well, I suggest checking out what's present in the product. So I've heard that a lot, like, oh, I don't get any relief from CBD. Well, how much are you taking and what's it derived from? So if it's hemp-based CBD and they've stripped all the THC out, you're not getting the entourage effect. So again, even if you're like me and you don't really do well with THC, you still want a little bit present to make sure that your body's own cannabinoid system is actually interfacing properly with the cannabis. Secondly, pay attention to how many milligrams there are per serving, because what I'm seeing, especially in the hemp CBD market, is they just don't put anything in the bottle. One of the things that was really important to us is that we put enough medicine in the bottle. So, I mean, if you look here on the slide, like we have over, in some cases, almost 1,200 milligrams of cannabinoids in every single bottle of our Hero 30 ml bottles. And that's so you can get enough medicine in your body. 25 mLs of CBD isn't going to do much for you. I mean, when I'm having real impact, I'll take, 500 milligrams of CBD a day. You really need to get a lot of medicine in your body. And oftentimes when I hear people who haven't had benefit from CBD, it's because whatever they were taking either didn't label it properly and didn't tell them what it was in it, or didn't have enough in it. And that's why it's so important to sort of take your notes and learn, what is going to be a good program for you. But generally speaking, more medicine, more better.
Yeah. And there is a difference too between, the CBD you buy at the cannabis dispensaries and the CBD you can buy like outside the dispensaries. Inside the dispensaries, it's heavily regulated, and what's on that product is actually what you will find in that bottle. But with the CBD you buy outside, like in a grocery store, health food store, there is no regulation, so they can put whatever they want on that bottle. So there's some people that are mislabeling. Sometimes they don't even have that information, and you don't necessarily know where that CBD is coming from. There could be CBD from like China, overseas, that doesn't really have any medical value. So it's very important to buy it from a good, credible source. And if you have to buy it because you're from like another state outside California, make sure you ask for a certificate of analysis. Even hemp CBD companies can do that. And then what I also tell people too is CBD is one of those things like where you can't just like take it one day and then take it another, like next month, another day. You really have to like build it up in your system, and you have to consistently use CBD to be able to get a result. And sometimes you might not even recognize like the result after 1 or 2 weeks. Sometimes you have to kind of just think back, like over the past 2 weeks, have I had less flare-ups? Have I had less bad days? Have I been sleeping better? Has my mood been better? And sometimes it's not until people stop their routine that they realize how much it was doing for them.
Completely agree. It's all of those things I completely agree with. The COA is a really big deal. And the fact that you need to take it consistently for it's like going to the gym. You need to, it has to be part of a system and a program. It can offer you pretty immediate relief, especially if there's THC in it, just sort of from pain relief, but inflammation is the light switch. It just doesn't go away overnight. So you do need to really keep at it.
Now, somebody's asking too, do you guys have like a hemp CBD line?
And I know, like,
oh, sorry. Somebody's asking, do you guys have a hemp CBD line out yet where that you can ship out of state, or are you guys only in California currently?
At this moment, we're only in California, although we are working on it. So we actually launched a perfume, which is CBD only, believe it or not. So it's sort of aromatherapy. Yeah. And that's available nationwide at the moment. And we are working on skincare, and we'll likely do some supplements at the same time. But that's probably, early 2022, based on how things are going with the COVID supply chain, but So sorry about that. At the moment, we're not good for Seattle.
Well, he'll be following, I'm sure, and listening, looking out for that product. So that kind of leads me to my last question I had as well. So what is coming in the future of Well Founded? Do you guys have any exciting things that you're coming out to the market with?
Yes, some very exciting things. Thank you for asking. So almost immediately, I think that they're at the dispensary now. I mean, the distribution center now. We have our capsules, so which echo the same. We have 3 different ratios to select from for the same reason. But what's nice about capsules is they're really, really discreet. They're very, very consistent dosing. I mean, literally, per capsule, it's just you can't mess it up. You can't make too much of a dropper full or not enough. And they're very easy to sort of take with you. They don't break in your purse. That's the only bummer about tinctures for me, is they're hard to travel up and down the state, without worrying that you might have a little bit of a mishap. And so we thought the capsule were really helpful. We're also coming up with a body balm, and I'm very proud of this body balm. It's, coming from a fashion and beauty world, we worked really, really hard with our topicals to make them sort of feel as sensual and as luxurious as possible. So a lot of the body balms that are on the market today in the cannabis space are very waxy and just aren't that nice to touch. So this is some luxurious butter. It's really, really good stuff, and it smells great. And then we're also doing a body oil, a bath and body oil, and then a face oil. So these things are coming. And then a THC fragrance is also.
That's so cool. I love that.
Which I'm really excited about. Yeah. Based on the terroir of our farm.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. And then you have a body splash. That's amazing. I haven't really seen too many companies.
Those are the immediate. Yeah, no, nobody really has, because perfume is so hard to develop, but we're fortunate enough because of the CBD fragrance. We have a really great partner who's been working with us, a really great perfume developer. And so we're working with this French perfume house. And they're sort of tasked with coming up with something that feels, again, like the experience of being at the farm. So notes of coastal sage and eucalyptus and salt sea air and cannabis, are kind of all blending together to make this really amazing atmospheric scent. And but we're putting THC in it. So it's going to be atomized THC. So it'll be an inhalable.
So you'll still have to buy it at a licensed dispensary then?
Yes, ma'am.
That's cool. That's so cool. I'm always impressed by the breadth of products that I see in the industry. And, I love walking out the floor like every week and seeing something completely new. And I'm like, well, that's amazing. That's really cool. And so likewise, I'm really excited to see all the products that you guys have coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, your personal story and your journey and the amazing information about your farm. You've inspired me. I want to I want to go and move up north and open a farm as well. That sounds like an idyllic life. So I really, really appreciate your time for being with us today.
My absolute pleasure. I'm grateful for everybody for taking the time to visit with me.
Awesome. So thank you, everybody, for watching the episode today of the Pharmacy Cannabis Lecture Series. And I want to thank our guest, Sara Rotman, and also her whole entire team at Well Founded to help this make this event possible. I hope that we were able to share some information with all of you that will help you become better informed cannabis consumers, and that the information we shared will help you find relief. Until next time, thank you so much, and take care and be safe.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Yeah.